Hello, and thank you for joining me again today on the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. Have you ever written a letter to your angel baby? I am looking for people who would be willing to share these letters in a special project that I'm working on. The length of the letter doesn't matter, and when you wrote it doesn't matter either. If you would like more information, feel free to email me at Sarah with an H at journeyforjasmine.com, or you can reach out to me on any of my social media accounts at Journey for Jasmine. Today I am talking with Krista. She is a life coach who has 2 living children and went through 2 miscarriages. Krista also talks about the scare she had during pregnancy with one of her living children, as well as how she dealt with grief after her losses. Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Krista. Krista, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. My name is Krista, and I live in the Dallas area, as we were just talking about. We both are from the same area, which is kind of exciting. And I am the mom of 2 boys, thankfully, because as I'm sure we will talk a lot about today, we didn't know if we were going to be able to have these 2 boys. And so I have a almost 8-year-old and a 5-year-old right now. I've been married for almost 14 years, and I am a life coach.
We have a lot of similarities, like being from the same area, and then I have a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Yeah,
And yeah, we've been married about the same amount of time as well. So
I love it. Yes, I love finding people on similar journeys.
I do too. Have you found many people like in the lost community that have a similar like journey to you at all?
It's been interesting, and that's one of the things that I think so unique about this experience is it's like I feel like everybody's journey is so different, but we all sort of understand what we're going through, right? And so it's like the feelings around what's happening is very similar, even if the like actual like physical things that are happening to people are not the same. So
Mhm.
yeah, I found a lot of solidarity in other people who can really like get what I'm talking about kind of thing. And then also I've been able to provide that for others as well, which has been such a gift.
So do you mind talking a little bit about your last story?
Yeah. So um when so it my okay, it started back in 2014. I guess is the best way to start it. So it's been a while. I can't believe I'm even saying that, but I guess I have an 8-year-old now, so it makes sense. So I decided in 2014, I was not even thinking about kids. And then all of a sudden it was like a flip switched for me one day. And I was like, I'm ready. I'm ready to have kids. I'm ready to start our family. Like, let's go. And my husband was totally on board. Like he was kind of ready whenever. And so we decided to start trying. And at the time, I didn't know, like we got pregnant very fast. And at the time, I didn't know what a gift that was because I didn't know anything about what women went through in order to um, have babies, right? And you always hear that babies are such a miracle. And I was always like, yeah, but people are having babies all the time, right? And you kind of until you are in it and you're experiencing things that we have experienced, you don't really understand what that means, that like it truly is a miracle when a woman has a baby. And so we got pregnant really fast. It was very exciting. And then with my first baby, we actually went in at 9 weeks. I'm not sure why we had to wait so long to go in for the first ultrasound, but we went in and that was the first time I had seen my doctor. I hadn't gone in before that at all. We went in at 9 weeks and she did the ultrasound. And the baby had died already at 6 weeks. And I'm like getting emotional talking about it right now.
Oh, it's okay. I know it's an
Um,
emotional thing to talk about.
yeah, it's so interesting how I've done a lot of healing around it and it's still there's just nothing like it. And so it still just brings up some stuff, even though I'm far separated from it and that kind of thing. So anyways, so she told us very gently, she was a good doctor at that time. And then I'll tell you later in the story, things got a little weird with her, but, so she told us that the baby didn't have a heartbeat and, that had probably died about 3 weeks earlier. And then I went in for a DNC because I don't remember what it's called, but basically like my body was not miscarrying. I think it was called a missed miscarriage. And so my body was not miscarrying on its own. And so I went in, got the DNC. And I just remember my husband and I being in this kind of sheer about like, oh yeah, pregnancy loss and things like that. And I don't think that you understand what the toll that it takes, and you don't understand like what it really means. Like you hear that the term pregnancy loss feels like such a um clinical term for something so emotional, and so you don't really understand like you're losing a child and all of the dreams that we'd had and the names we had thought of and all these things. And so then we kind of worked through that. We were sad for a long time, and then we decided like we were going to go ahead and try again a couple months later. And so again, we got pregnant very fast. It was like so amazing. So basically like 4 months later, I was pregnant again. And so then again, we go in for our 9-week appointment, and the baby didn't have a heartbeat. And it was really, really hard, especially because it was so close together. They were 6 months, literally 6 months apart, almost to the day of when we went in. And we had been doing therapy in between this time, and talking to, I had a time and I had a therapist at the time, and we were talking to both of them about different things and how to work through this and how to process and all of that. And it was so traumatizing going in that second time because it was like just reliving everything that we had been working on for those 6 months. And so then at that point, and that one was really hard because that baby, the heartbeat had stopped 2 days before we went in. I don't know how they were able to tell that, but that's what she told me. And later I got a DNC with that baby as well. And so later we were able to find out that baby actually had Turner syndrome. So it was a girl. And that baby had Turner syndrome. And that's why the miscarriage happened, because she just wasn't able to survive the pregnancy. And so, and it was so interesting because people were trying to be so encouraging about that, right? They would say things like, oh, it was probably better that this happened because, she would have had such a hard life with Turner syndrome and things like that. And the only thing I could think at that time was like, it doesn't matter because I wanted her, right? I wanted her. I didn't care if she had Turner syndrome or what she was like or whatever. Like I wanted her and I wanted her to be part of my life. And it didn't, those things were not comforting at that time, and they still aren't comforting to me. Like I still want her. I still wish that it would have worked out.
Right.
And I think that's an important thing to remember, especially like when you're talking to people about losses that they've had, is like it's not, it doesn't feel good to think like, oh well, this is the way it was meant to be or something like that, right? Because it's so painful. And so then we decided that we weren't going to try anymore and we were going to wait for a while and let ourselves heal from it. And, just kind of give ourselves some space between it. And I just didn't know. And I told my husband, I said, I can't keep doing this. If we go in again and this happens again, and, they allow you to have 3 miscarriages, which I just think is insane, but they
Yeah,
allow you.
that's ridiculous.
Yeah. And that's what my doctor told me. She's like, you can have 3 miscarriages before we think something's wrong. And it was just wild to me to think about all of these women. And I know women who have gone through way more miscarriages than I did. But anyway, so I just told my husband, I was like, if we have another miscarriage, like, I think I'm done. Like, I don't think I can keep going and keep trying. We're going to have to either decide to not have a family or find another way. Um, and so anyways, so then we decided to stop trying, and then we accidentally got pregnant a few months later. We got a dog in between there because I told my husband, and I think this is an important thing for people to think about when they're going through loss like this, is it felt like there was so much death in my body and in my house and just in life in general. And so I told my husband, I was like, I need something with life. I need to bring life back into our life. And And so we got a dog and that was really fun. And that was very healing to get her. And so then we were doing pretty good. And then we accidentally got pregnant, in a few months later. So in March of 2015 was my last miscarriage. And then we got pregnant in July of 2015. And the moment I found out, I went to the doctor and they put me on progesterone and, all the different things. Right. And, that was my son. So that one worked out. We did have a big, like a whole thing with him too, if you want me to tell that part of the story as well.
Sure, if you want to go into it.
Okay. So yeah. So then we got pregnant and we had my son, and I went in and I got the progesterone, and the pregnancy was looking good. And I went in at 8 weeks and we saw the heartbeat, which was just like so amazing. Um, oh, one thing, I'll add that at the end. Um, yeah, so we went in and we saw the heartbeat. It was so great. It was at 8 weeks. And my doctor said to me, she was like, like you have come in at 9 weeks every time up until now. And like, that's when the heartbeat has not been there. And she's like, why don't you go ahead and come in at 10 weeks so that you're going to cause you're going to just be nervous until your next ultrasound. And so why don't you just come in again at 10 weeks and let's look at the baby again so that you can feel good and know that you've like made it past that 9 week mark. Which I thought was really nice. So we went in at 10 weeks and he was good and it was great. And so everything was going really well. And then we went in for the 20-week scan, which is the really exciting one where, you get to see the whole baby and like they, are kicking and you can see their head and it's just like, it's wonderful. Right. So we go in for this scan and we're just like over the moon. Like he's looking great. They tell us it's a boy. Like we're just thrilled out of our minds. And so we walk into the doctor's office and we've got all these pictures of this ultrasound, and she's like, okay. And she's like, oh, are you guys just so excited right now? And we were like, oh my gosh, we're so excited. And then she goes, well, I'm not.
What?
I was like, what? Like, it was so traumatizing. And we were like, what are you
Let's
talking
learn how
about?
to talk to people.
I know. And what was so hard for me is that she was the doctor that had been through all the miscarriages with us. So like she knew what we had been through to get to that moment. And so to just say it like that, like I'll just never forget it. Like, well, I'm not happy. And I was like, oh my gosh. So basically what happened was we found out, she told us that there were some markers on the scan that indicated that this baby would either have Down syndrome when he was born, or he would have these two other chromosomal abnormalities where he would die at birth. So you could imagine somebody who had just lost two babies and then this pregnancy is going so well to hear like there's a 30 or a 66% chance that your baby's going to die when it's born. And if it doesn't die, then it's going to have Down syndrome. Right. And so then suddenly you're praying that your baby has Down syndrome because that's the better of the options. Right.
Right.
And so anyways, I was crying in tears. I called my mom. My poor mom has gone through all of this with us. And then she finds out like we didn't even get to do like a fun like gender reveal or like tell them or anything. I was like crying on the phone, Mom, we're having a baby. Please come to the hospital with us because they're about to tell us that the baby's either going to die or have Down syndrome. My mom starts crying. I mean, it was just this whole big dramatic thing. So anyways, we get to the hospital because she sent us immediately to a specialist who had a better ultrasound machine and knew more what he was looking at on the ultrasounds and stuff like that. And so we get there, he does an ultrasound while we're all in tears around him. And basically he says, okay, I need to talk you off a ledge here because basically he didn't see anything. And he said that the markers that she was looking at were kind of an old school way of diagnosing Down syndrome. And when he looked at it, he was like, everything is fine with your baby. And and the other thing is she had recommended that we would get a amniocentesis. And so one out of every 500 of those miscarry. Like every time somebody gets an amniocentesis, 1 out of 500 of those miscarry. And I was like, how can you ask me after going through miscarriages to then up the risk of this baby miscarrying? And so anyways, basically the specialist was able to help us realize that nothing, like this baby was going to be fine. Um, but it's still like the rest of my pregnancy was just on pins and needles until he arrived essentially and was healthy. And I even think now that I get more nervous about his health than I do about my younger one because of everything that we went through with him. Even though he is perfectly healthy, he is happy, he is smart, I mean, like all the things, right? Like everything is great with him. And I still, like, if he gets sick, I'm this because we thought we were almost going to lose him. We didn't really almost lose him, but we were told we were going to almost lose him.
And
And
that's not
so
something you just like get over. I mean, that's kind of scars you for life.
right, exactly. So yeah, so that is my story.
Oh, definitely a stressful, even with your living children. I hope
Yes.
that the other pregnancy after that was not as stressful for you.
It was not. So after that, because I had gone to so many ultrasounds and seen so many doctors, and the whole time they're just making you feel so stressed out the whole time. Like every time I got an ultrasound with my older one, they were like, oh, he's going to be too big to fit through your pelvis and you're going to have a C-section and blah, blah, blah. And they were just pumping me up all the time with all this anxiety about what could happen. Right. And turns out he was not too big and I had a fine delivery with him. Um, so then after that, and I realized like I had a great delivery. This kid is perfectly healthy and everything's fine. And all of this stuff that I had gone through with all of these doctors was just like, it was just, it wasn't helpful. It was too much information, you know? And so with my younger one, I actually went to a midwife instead. And I walked in and I was like, well, I went to a doctor first and I said, I want to have a natural birth. I don't want to have any medication. I don't want to have tons of ultrasounds. I don't want to have a C-section. And I was like, can you help me? And she was like, asked me some questions about my last son. And she said, well, based on that, I'm going to go ahead. I was 8 weeks pregnant. Okay. She was like, based on that, I'm going to go ahead and schedule a C-section for you. And I was like, what in the world?
What?
She was like, because my older son was 9 pounds and 15 ounces. And so she was like, we're just going to go ahead and schedule a C-section. And I was like, okay, you are not the doctor for me. And so after that, I found a midwife and I went to a birthing center and I walked in and I said, I'm here for you to check me out. And I said, if I don't show up to any of my other appointments, will you still take me whenever I'm in labor and let me come in and have the baby here? And they were like, please come to all of your appointments. And I did. I ended up going to all of them because going to the midwife is so relaxing. Like it's just, you can bring your kids there. They have kid toys for the kids to play with. They're very calm. Like it's such a different environment. It's like treating pregnancy like this beautiful thing that's happening to you, not like a medical emergency, the way that it's treated in like doctor's offices often. And so my second pregnancy was the most uneventful pregnancy of all time. It was so good. My son was healthy. I was healthy. We were all happy. And then I delivered him in 2 hours and it was amazing. So
Now, the doctor who was going to try to schedule the C-section, that wasn't the same doctor that you had before. Was this a new doctor?
that was a different doctor. Can you believe it?
I was like, that sounds like something the other doctor would have done.
Yeah, I dropped her after she did the whole bit about, well, I'm not feeling good or I'm not happy. I was like, I can't deal with you anymore. So I moved on to another doctor after her because I felt like I couldn't keep going to her after that, you know.
In talking to as many people as I have who have been through loss, I'm still like shocked every day at some of the things that doctors do and say.
Yeah, definitely. You know, after that, I also had postpartum depression with my first son because of all of everything that I had been through, you know. And it was just really it was really amazing to kind of like come to an understanding of like taking control of my own health, and not to say that you shouldn't trust doctors or you should never go to the doctor, but just knowing that like your kids and your body better than anybody else. And when something doesn't feel right to you, or something doesn't seem like it's going to be like, it's not the only option. They're not the only game in town, right? And so if that doctor is not going to work out for you because of whatever reason, like go to another doctor or find another like I found the midwife, for example. There's different options that you can find, and you can find healthcare that is supportive and helps you reach your goals and doesn't make you doesn't make you feel anxious all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, I think sometimes, myself included, we forget that we don't have to stay with one doctor. Like we can look for another one.
Absolutely. You have agency. And I think a lot of times, the way that we do healthcare today makes us feel like we can't say no to things. Like even when my son was older, he had to have stitches, and he had to have 2 stitches. Okay. And they wanted to give him some sort of, like kind of like a laughing gas kind of thing, that they were going to give it to him and he would have to wait for 30 minutes, and then it would like make him feel really loopy. It wasn't even like the numbing cream or anything. It was just like something to like sedate him kind of.
Mm.
And I was like, why are you giving that to him? Like, it's 2 stitches and you've already numbed the site where the stitches are. And so I said no to it. But we don't have that feeling that we can say no to medical professionals. And you can say no, you can say this isn't right, and you can find a medical professional that is going to support your goals and how you want to have your health, like your health goals basically, and how you want the health of your family to be. And you don't always have to say yes just because somebody told you had to.
Yes, I think you said that perfectly. I think it's something we all need to be better at.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like you had a pretty supportive family during your losses.
I did. Yeah. I mean, our family is close. And that's one of the reasons, as we talked about before, that I stayed in the Dallas area. But yeah, I mean, my parents, and, it's hard because you're going through it, but, your family's going through it too, right? Because just as much as you wanted that baby, they had dreams as well. And just like my mom had dreams of becoming a grandmother, and, things like that. And so it's really hard. I think it's really amazing when parents can show up for you. And it's also such a good thing to remember that like they're in it with you, and they're going through their own version of loss as well when you're going through it. And so sometimes that can be hard because everybody's going through it. And sometimes that can also feel good because it's like you're all in it together.
Yeah, because I found that I was lucky to have a really supportive family and everything too, but loss is just really lonely, even with support. So it is nice to know that you have those people in your corner that you can turn to.
Yeah. And I think for me, finding other people's stories that had gone through it was really helpful, because I found that if you haven't gone through it, you don't know what it is, right? And that's not saying that people, like I had people send me flowers and, things like that to show their support, and it was really nice. But until you have experienced it, it's hard to really know what it feels like to lose a child. And having other women that had walked a similar path, and that, we would do things, and we still do this some years, like on October 15th is Infant Loss Awareness Day. And so for a long time, we would like release balloons, or we would light candles, or, various things like that. And sometimes we would do it. So we named our 2 babies that we lost. And excuse me. And so we named them. And so we would write their names on the balloons and, release them and different things like that. And then we would do it for other babies as well. So we had other women that we knew that had gone through similar things. And we would send them pictures of us, releasing balloons in their, like for their babies as well, or lighting a candle for their baby and, things like that. And I think, knowing that there's somebody else thinking about your child in the way that you're thinking about it is really powerful, because that life, that little human life that never made it earthside, as if you will, um they they're forgotten, right? And that's what it feels like, is like they were so important, and we had so many thoughts and dreams and plans and things for those little lives, and you don't want to forget them. I don't want to ever forget them. And I've told my sons about them, and so they know their names, and they know that they came before them. Um, and so I think it's important to have people that remember with you.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's hard when you feel like, they were so important to you and you feel like you're fighting so hard to keep their memory alive and, you're the only one doing it.
Yes. Absolutely.
So what do you think um, is your best piece of advice for people who are newly going through loss?
Okay. So my favorite piece of advice is, it's really, really hard when you first start out. And I remember my husband and I, when we first found out about our first baby, we were so unprepared, right? We just didn't have any concept of this even being a possibility in our lives. And even if we had, I don't even know how we would have prepared for it, right? And I remember we were in such shock, and we tried to go we needed dinner, and we tried to go into a sandwich shop and order a sandwich. And it was like I was like, can you just hand me food? Like, can you just, I don't care what's on my sandwich. Like, can you just give me food so I can walk out of here with food, because it was like, even making the decision about like what kind of sandwich I wanted in that moment was just um so hard. And so I guess I'll say two things. One thing that I thought was really good advice that I was given was to make sort of like an emergency kit. So like this was my coach actually at the time that suggested this, and she was like, I hope that this never happens to you again, but can you write down and say like, this is the type of sandwich that I like at this shop, or like order this for dinner, or whatever other things that you felt like you needed during that time. Can you write them all down so that if this ever happens again, you know that you can open the emergency kit and just read the list and go through the steps and not feel like you have to like make decisions and things like that. And so I think if there's any way that during this time that you can allow for yourself to make the least amount of decisions, it's so helpful to not feel the stress of like having to order your dinner, for example, or whatever, while you're going through this. And so if you can reach out and lean on people and allow people to bring you dinner, allow people to pick up groceries for you, allow people to bring you a coffee, whatever it is, so that you can spend time sitting in your grief, because feeling the feelings of what you're going through is the most important thing. And so, um, feel like allowing yourself plenty of time to process, feel the feelings, and then not allowing yourself to stay stuck in them. And so when I was going through postpartum depression, I did all kinds of things. I took medication. I did all the things they tell you to do, right? And I couldn't get out of it. I was still just like dying in this depression. And so I just decided one day that I was just going to do one thing that made me feel good. And if that's all I could do that day, I would just do that one thing. So even if I laid in bed all day long, but for 5 minutes, I did one thing. And the thing that I decided on, which was kind of funny at the time, because I wasn't like a big makeup person, but I just decided like, what if I got a lipstick, like a really fun lipstick that I really loved, And what if I just put on lipstick every day? And that's it. That's all I had. Like, that was like, I would be accomplished if I did that. And so if you can pick one thing like that, that will lift your spirits a little bit, then that one thing often leads to another thing and another thing and another thing. And then finally you find yourself out of the grief and the depression, and you find yourself on the other side. And so taking the gentle steps like that, but taking them while also allowing yourself to feel the feelings, was what helped me process and get through all of this.
I think that's really great advice. It's really hard, like you said, after going through a loss. It's like I don't want to make any decisions. I don't want to decide like what I'm eating for dinner or what it's all really, really hard. So I think, doing what you said, making the list and then just taking things one day at a time, doing one thing a day just for you to move forward.
Yes, absolutely. The one thing, and then it makes it more, it doesn't feel insurmountable, right? One thing feels possible.
Yeah, because I think after loss, people expect us to just go back to, putting it in quotes, normal as, quickly as we can. And we just can't do that. And we shouldn't be expected to do that. And we shouldn't expect ourselves to do that.
Yeah, and if you do it, the grief will come later. And it will come at an unexpected time. And so to me, it's better if you can allow yourself to process it now, so that excuse me, it's better if you can allow yourself to process it now, so that you're in control of it, right? Versus like shoving it down, trying to get back to your regular life, and then somehow it shows up later at a time when you're not expecting it, in a way that you're not expecting it.
Oh yes, I've definitely I've definitely had that happen to me many times. I'm like, oh well, I should have probably let some of that grief out a little sooner so it didn't explode all at once.
Yes.
So I know you talked about it already a little bit, but are there some other things that have helped you get through the grief?
Yeah, one of the things that was really, really profound for me was, and this is kind of my husband's experience of everything that we went through, which is such an interesting, you like, the woman is going through it in a certain way because it's her body, right? It's happening to her body. But then the partner is also going through it in their own way. And so my husband, whenever we had our second miscarriage, we're sitting in the doctor's office and he starts crying. This is the part that gets me the most emotional, and maybe I'm going to start crying right now while I'm talking about it.
Oh,
But he said, as we were sitting there in the doctor's office, he said, I didn't even celebrate this baby for 1 minute. And I will never forget that, because we were so anxious and we were so deep in the grief and the fear, and just worried about losing this child, that we didn't even get to have a moment of being excited about her. Um, and then she was gone, and we felt so robbed that we weren't able to, even for a moment, celebrate her and her life, as short as it was, right? And so, I guess my advice from that would be, allow yourself to have the grief, but don't allow yourself to um steal the joy from other moments. So feel the feelings of your grief, but don't allow this experience to take away from your future experiences. And so, yes, will it be hard? Yes, will you be scared? Yes, will you have big feelings, all of that, but do the work, do your work, so that you can celebrate your children now, your children in the future, or if you aren't able to have children, whatever comes next for you in life, right? Find a way to celebrate the good, even if it is for just a moment, right? Even if all you can muster up is being thankful and happy for like a small period of time. Because if it doesn't work out again, or if it does, you want to make sure that you were able to see the good in all of the things that were happening. And you don't want to get to that point where you're like, I've just lived in anxiety and I haven't been able to even for one moment celebrate anything. So I guess that's kind of going back to the one thing advice as well is like, can you find one thing that's good? Can you find one moment? You know, my my husband and I, after the first miscarriage, we like went down, we lived in this apartment complex and we went down to this, they had like a pumpkin carving contest and we carved an Olaf pumpkin. And we're like in our grief and we're like so sad and like we can barely get dressed, you know, and all this stuff. And then we go down and we're like carving this Olaf pumpkin. And I like look at those pictures of us and we won the contest, by the way. And we like, and I just looked at those pictures of us and I just think about like, that's what we were trying to do during that time, right? That's what we were trying to do um with our grief is we were trying to still find moments of celebration and still find moments of good. And that's another thing that will help pull you out of it.
Yeah, it's so hard, when you've been through loss and you're pregnant again, or if you have like a threatened loss, or if you're going through pregnancy after loss, just anything like that, just not being terrified the entire pregnancy. It's really hard to not let all of that just take over to where, like you said, you're afraid to celebrate, or you're afraid to buy things, or you're afraid to do anything related to the pregnancy because you're just afraid of losing another baby.
Yeah, afraid to tell people. I mean, that's such a big one is that we have this sort of like, well, I'm not going to tell people until I'm 13 weeks pregnant and like in the second trimester. And I think that's just wrong. I think that you should tell people because you need people if it doesn't go well.
Mm.
And so I think that celebrating as soon as you find out, celebrating every day that you are pregnant, I mean, as much as you can enjoy the process, even if it's hard, even if you celebrate for one moment and you're crying the next moment, it's okay, but just allow yourself at least a few moments of joy throughout it.
Yeah, I don't like that, and wait until after the first trimester to announce because, I mean, for two reasons. One, we know that there is no safe zone in pregnancy,
Right.
but also I feel like it kind of encourages people to keep their losses quiet.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I definitely, with my first pregnancy, that was after we went through infertility, but before my losses. But I waited until, the first trimester. And then I'm like, oh, look, I'm safe. And then, everything fortunately went fine with that pregnancy. But as I learned with my daughter, Jasmine, who I lost at 32 weeks, yeah, that,
Mhm.
making it past that first trimester doesn't really mean anything.
Right. Absolutely. It doesn't. And it doesn't mean, I think the other thing is it doesn't like loss. This is one of the things that my doctor was really good about actually is whenever we lost our first baby, I said, "Oh, well, I'm so glad that we lost this baby now and we didn't lose this baby I didn't have like a stillborn baby or we didn't lose this baby later." And she was like, "No, no, no." And she was like, "It doesn't matter. Like the loss is the same. Like it doesn't matter. Like the feeling of losing a child is the same, whether they're like 8 weeks old or whether they're 40 weeks old or whether they're 18 years old." Right. And so I appreciated her saying that because to me, it made it feel like no matter where you are in your pregnancy, you should be celebrating and be excited. And you also should be able to talk to people about what it feels like to lose a child at all stages because it's all legitimate.
Oh, that was an amazing thing for her to say because so many, won't say that because you hear that at least you're early, all of those things. But and I've also seen it a lot in the lost community itself, people who feel like they can't be as sad because, well, I was only 5 weeks, or I was, I
Right.
had an embryo loss, and I'm like, no, no, that was like you said, that was your baby. It doesn't matter how old they were.
Absolutely.
So I just and I know we all do it. We all play that comparison game, whether we mean to or not. But Yeah, stop playing it in the loss community.
There you go. Perfect. Let's just stop it.
So is there any other advice or anything else that you want to add?
Hmm. I think maybe what's coming up for me right now is just this idea of one of the things I teach in my coaching all the time is we talk about this phrase like what are you making this mean about you? So like if somebody is, like if somebody like loses a client, for example, or something like that, right? I'll say, okay, what are you making this mean about you? And I think that that is such a significant question that I would encourage all women to ask themselves as well whenever they're going through any kind of infertility, losing their children, like anything like that, is saying, what are you making this mean about you? Because a lot of times we pile on and add to our grief because we are making it mean that we are not good enough for whatever reason, right? Like my body's not good enough. I'm not healthy enough. I did something wrong. Like that was immediately like when I lost my first baby, I was like, what did I do? What could I have done differently? Right. And of course there are like, I later found out that I was highly vitamin D deficient, right? And vitamin D plays a big part in miscarriages, right? So that would have been nice for somebody to have like tested me and found that out. And I could have been taking lots of vitamin D and maybe that would have helped. I don't know. Right. But we kind of like we make it very personal and we make it like there's something wrong with me because I can't have children or I'm struggling to have children or I lost my children. Right. And I would encourage women to not make it personal like that and not make themselves out to be the bad guys, the villains, the problem, because loss is happening, and allow it to be, and it's hard because it's like, it's not personal, right? Obviously the loss is personal, but it doesn't mean that you are not good enough or worthy as a human being. And it doesn't mean that you are not good enough or worthy to be a mother. And so I think if we can start having that conversation, I think that's going to be really healing for a lot of women, because the conversation up until now has been a lot of making women feel like they're the problem.
Yes, I agree. We are also hard on ourselves too. Like you said, we just add that extra layer of guilt, like, oh, it's our fault. We must have done something. We should have known. We should have done something differently. And yeah, it's not our fault.
No, it's not. And we don't have as good of access to medical advice, in my opinion, because there's a lot of things I've learned about nutrition and things like that since then, that it's like even with my second son, I was eating a paleo diet because of other health problems that I had, and my labor with him was literally 2 hours long, and it was so fast and so easy, and I had no medication. And the nurse afterwards, she was like, what kind of diet are you eating? And I told her, and she said that there are studies that have been done now on sugar, and that women who have my son was born in January, and she said that women who have January pregnancy or January labors, babies in January, typically have harder labors because we're coming off the holiday season and they've been eating a lot of sugar. And if women would stop eating sugar 4 weeks, just 4 weeks, not even the whole pregnancy, okay, just 4 weeks before, um, and you guys will have to go find the studies because I don't have them to quote to you, but this is what this nurse said. 4 weeks before they went into labor, that their labors would be shorter, they would be easier, the contractions would not be as strong. Just all these different things that would make labor so much better for women. Why don't we have that information? Why is everybody not screaming that from the rooftops, right? Like that's the easiest thing in the world. And we might have less women dying during labor. We might have less babies dying during labor. We might have less tearing and less like issues afterwards. And so it's wild how little information we have to what could actually help us. And so it is not your fault because you don't even have the whole story.
That's crazy to me too, because nutrition should be like the foundation of medical care. And yet it's just like brushed over. Like, we're just told, okay, eat healthy. But like, what does that mean?
Yeah. And I've since found out that medical doctors only get 1 hour of nutrition in medical school. So they don't know how to advise you on nutrition because they're not trained on it. So that's who we're going to, right? And so, that's why back to my original advice of finding options for your healthcare and going wide with your healthcare, I think is really important, because especially if you are experiencing, like I did, lots of miscarriages, I later found out that there were things that I could do to help increase my chances of not miscarrying. Now, this was after I had my second son. And so, no, well, that's not true. It was after I had my first son. So I started doing those things. And then my second pregnancy was way easier and my labor was way easier. So there are things you can do to help yourself. That doesn't mean that it's your fault that you're not doing them right now. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're 100% effective either. Right. So, back to the, like, don't blame yourself, just get curious. And that's another thing I teach my clients all the time is like, commit to curiosity, get super curious and see, like, are there options? Are there things you can try? Can you change your diet? Changing your diet also helps with depression and helps with grief and things like that too. Right. So can you do things like that to help yourself, and increase your chances of higher fertility, of not miscarrying, things like that.
So if people wanted to connect with you, how would they do that?
Okay. Well, the best way is probably on my Instagram. That's where I'm most active. So my Instagram is Mindset Coach Krista, and Krista is Krista. So you can just send me a DM over there, and I'd love to chat with anyone. If you guys want to talk about your lost stories, if you want to hear more about mine, if you want to chat about what I did, I'm happy to do that.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Krista, for sharing your story with us. You speaking of wanting to bring the joy back into your life after experiencing so much death is something I think so many loss and infertility parents can relate to. When you go through these things, you're just surrounded by grief and disappointment and anger and guilt and all of these feelings that can just be so overwhelming sometimes. And it can be really hard to find the joy and the happiness in things again. I think it's important to remember that it's okay for us to have happy moments amidst our grief. We think we can't be happy again because it somehow dishonors our baby, or it feels like we're moving on, when nothing could be further from the truth. We never move on from our grief, but we learn to live with it and carry it with us. Part of learning to live with it is understanding that it's still with us even when we do things that bring us joy. That it's okay to want to be happy and do things that do make us feel that joy again. That no matter what, the joy doesn't erase any of the grief or the loss, but it does make it more bearable. Grief and joy often coexist in our world post-loss and infertility. We can't live the rest of our lives being sad every single moment. It's exhausting and it's hard, and you truly deserve to be able to feel that joy again. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.